Inside the Build, your destination for all things tech.
Hello, welcome to Inside the Build, a podcast sponsored by Experian Technologies. My name is John Ripma, and this program explores the heart behind the application. In our weekly series, we delve into the intersection between the emotions of building a complex business program, an application, and the technical side of that, how those come together, how you handle that, how you deal with the challenges that come with that. And we designed these conversations really for startups, entrepreneurs, and small businesses, small business owners who want to learn more about how that process plays out when you're trying to build a fantastic piece of digital software and you know that you're entering into the process really kind of blind sometimes. And so we're talking to Chris Shuba today. He's the CEO of Helios Quantitative. This is really the third of a four-part series of business case that we're working on with Chris. He's going to share his experiences, his emotional ups and downs, and technical challenges that he faced with the building of a portfolio analysis product that he has built and continues to use with independent financial advisors. His business proposition is that Helios provides services, the digital tools and technology to help these advisors level a playing field against the giants of the industry. And so, Chris, welcome back to Inside the Build. Today we'll be talking about something a little different. We're moving on down the line in terms of your building process. We'll be talking about beta testing. You'll remember the beta testing days and the revision process. So, you've told us a lot about how you got us to the point where you've got a product. Now we're nearing the end of the build, and we're starting to really evaluate, is this what we wanted? Is it not what we wanted? And so it's the beta process. So, if you could think back, I know it's been a while, and tell us what you remember about the beta process. And, you had some of your good customers who were part of the beta process. And so it was opening up doors and opening up your eyes to new things. So take a few minutes and tell us about what it was like with the beta, the first version.
Beta is by far the most interesting of the experiences, right? So, we talked a lot about it's super important to do your work up front, get all your requirements in place, right? We talked about how you go through design and coding and your team or you are bouncing back and forth, collaborating along the way. Well, then eventually, it's done, right? You're into this functioning system, and all these requirements and nebulous conversations you had are now sitting there in front of you, and you can click around and use it, right? And beta is, for those of you that are fairly new, it's kind of a pre-release way of thinking about things. So it's usable, but it's probably not the finished gig, right? And so some companies will have a totally internal beta. Sometimes they call that the alpha. Others will release it to, other testers or clients to kind of battle test and break the thing.
Sorry about that.
What's that?
My telephone would not stop ringing.
Oh, I didn't even hear it. Didn't even come through.
Sorry about that.
He can edit that out.
Yeah.
So
okay.
As we get into the beta conversation, I'm going to talk about the harder parts of it, because the good parts are pretty obvious, right? Here's a system that you've been designing for however many months, and now it's real, and that's exciting. But the hard part about it is that you never build perfect tech. And so right out of the gate, you're going to start clicking around, and you're probably going to find certain things that might meet the exact requirement that you wrote, but it's not the experience that you wanted. And that is a huge learning curve in software development, is this idea of the technical capability of doing something and the actual experience using it. And that's why I recommend to think about your requirements or what you want to build in a system through a workflow of a user coming into your system and accomplishing a specific task or general outcome, and how those requirements link to each other, more so than just focusing on a requirement. And that took me a while to get to, because we originally thought just in terms of capabilities, not in how those capabilities link together in a workflow. So your first beta, you're probably going to start seeing some of these workflows that don't exactly match up to what you're looking for, right? And that's communication, right? That's the collaborative process. Is why you're doing the beta, is to look at, okay, that isn't exactly the exact way I want to do this. Can we tweak this, that, or the other? Some of them are really easy. Some of them get punted to later iterations of your software because
Right.
it's just a big deal, right? And just totally depends on what it is. So that's the first thing that's going to happen during your beta. And then the second thing that's going to happen is that, especially if you release this to clients, they're going to start pointing out things that it doesn't do or doesn't do well. And again, that's the same thing where you then have to prioritize, do we add something into the software before its release? Do we fix something that they think is missing before the release? Or do you let that ride and punt those to another version of your software and upgrade? And there will probably be both. So the beta is that combination of excitement and anticipation meeting reality, for lack of a better way of saying it. And it's great. It's part of it. It's just the way it's going to be. And every beta is going to be exactly the same, especially if it is a decent build, if it's a decent upgrade, if it's a decent amount of something being accomplished. Because, you know, if you take years to build something, you might have less, angst or disappointment in a beta. But if you're like any normal company where you're managing speed, quality, and cost all at the same time, you're likely going to end up with an iterative beta process that is a combination of fixing things or adding things or punting things. So it's just the first time's the hardest, but the rest every other time is great. But I talked
Yeah,
about the
let's
bad
talk.
stuff, but
Yeah,
that's what people care about. So
yeah.
yeah.
Let's kind of kick this can a little bit further, and let's
Mhm.
this program, this podcast, we like to think it's going to be about the technical as well
Mhm.
as the emotional.
Mhm.
And when you get into beta, sometimes you get into the emotional aspect of it that sort of looks like finger pointing.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
disappointment. That this isn't what I wanted, and now here it is, and what am I going to do? So you got some emotional baggage, that seems to accumulate during the. How do you handle that? Because as you said, it's inevitable. Particularly
Mhm.
the first piece that you build, it's inevitable that's going to be disappointments. And how did you handle that? Try to remember back where it wasn't. This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I wrote that check for. How did you handle that?
I
Did
never
you
had the
go just
experience.
go hug your
Yeah.
wife and hug your dog, or
No,
what?
I mean, I didn't have the experience with our team and Experian where there was that level of disappointment,
Hmm,
right? Um, for us, we learned a lot of lessons along the way, right? Like doing the requirements work up front and how to be collaborative and all. We learned all those things. We had no experience doing it, so we literally started from zero knowledge about any of this stuff. So it took longer our first build than because that was the ramification of not doing other things right, right? Just took longer.
right.
Um,
Hmm.
and when you get to your beta, what you'll find is that there's 90% of it is exactly what you want, right? And then there's this 10% of whatever, either something I didn't do or my team didn't do, or Experian didn't understand the way we wanted it to, or didn't get drawn the right way. For me, graphics was always my thing, right? I was always
Hmm.
focused on the graphics,
Visual,
how it
very
how
visual.
it linked, yeah.
Hmm.
And if you allow yourself to just focus on that 10%, you'll drive yourself insane. But that's what business owners have to do. I mean, it's not just tech. I mean, probably 90% of the time, I'm always happy with things going on inside the company. It's the 10% I'm always focusing on, right? And so I think
Mm-hmm.
CEOs are pretty good at compartmentalizing that there's always that 10%. Some builds, the more aggressive and big they are, you're going to have that 10% is going to be more impactful. Smaller builds, that 10% is not going to be. But um, that's the nature of the way all technology is going to work. Is that your beta is going to be 90% of everything you expected and 10% is something different, and you roll with it. That's just why technology is an ongoing thing. You don't build it and leave it alone. When you start tech, you build and build and build and build, and you just have to be thoughtful about what that looks like. But there was no hugging dogs, there was no crying to my wife, there was never a consideration of why did I cut this check or not. If you go down that kind of a spiral, I, I put it this way. I mean, this is going to be a compliment to Experian, is that they're not going to let you end up there, right? There's so many different check-ins and approvals and knowledge about what you're getting along the way that you're not going to end up, you know, that surprised. It's always going to come down to either things you didn't put in requirements that now your clients are saying, hey, what about this? Or a workflow that is technically accurate, but again, your specific expertise or your vision wasn't met and it just wasn't communicated. I mean, there's no such thing as really pointing fingers in this, because anything that doesn't end up exactly the way you want it is going to touch everything from your team to their team to you yourself. And you
Mm-hmm.
just have to know that, right? You just have to be
Mm-hmm.
intellectually honest with yourself. So
Yeah.
beta's great. I mean, it's exciting because you're like on the home stretch, but you just know in beta there's going to be more work. It's just the way it goes. So,
Right. Right. Yeah. And that the last question that I've got for our beta discussion today is, what were the really beautiful moments where you were in beta and you looked at something and you thought, wow, this is better than I expected? Or
Mhm.
if you can remember back, or this works better than I thought, or I'm getting feedback from my real clients that are testing this that's
Mhm.
really better than, I mean, do you have some of those kind of
Yeah.
aha on a positive note?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I didn't mean to talk about it on the bad side of things. One thing I will mention before I say the good things, in beta, you also might find something that is actually broken, that is
Mhm.
not working
Mhm.
correctly. And that's the main point of beta, right?
Mhm.
Because when you
Correct.
have, especially if you build complex software, a calculation might not be running. And a good partner is going to be Johnny on the spot with that, right?
Mhm.
They're going to recognize, hey, we didn't code something right or whatever. And the reason you're doing beta is to quality control everything, right? When you have
That's right.
millions of lines of code, something's not going to work. And so even
That's
though
right.
part of beta is frustrating when you find those errors, that's why you're doing it. It's part of the process. So you can never be mad about those types of things,
Right.
assuming they can
Right.
fix it in a reasonable time.
Right.
Um, the beautiful part is always the same, and that is you're building software for a goal. You're building it to actually do something. And when now all of a sudden, all this manual work that you've been doing on your end, you hit a button and it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Or your clients are able to do something they've always dreamed that they could do,
Mm-hmm.
and now it exists.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
almost surreal.
Yeah.
Um, and you have a hard time like letting go of the way the old way was, because, well, it can't be that easy now. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
so the outcome of beta, or seeing beta, or even being in beta, that 90% is pretty magical, right? Especially if it's
Yeah.
a big build. If it's a small
Yeah.
build, it's not as awesome, but that's you got to let yourself enjoy that, because if you only
Yeah.
focus on that 10%, you'll just drive yourself nuts. So,
Yeah. It's like winning a football game.
mhm,
You're paid to practice,
mhm,
but it's no fun practicing, but it's a lot of fun to win the game,
right.
and you're out there, you're playing for free
Mhm,
because your payment is hopefully to walk off the field with a victory. And so I
yep.
think that's kind of what you're experiencing there. Well, I'll tell you what, Chris,
Mhm,
thanks again.
mhm.
Fantastic insights that you bring to us. And so look forward to our next and our last podcast coming up shortly. Um, and thought till we meet again, just much success. Thank you, Chris.
Yep. See you then.